Imagine a world without Spider-Man swinging across New York's skyline. Imagine no Iron Man, no Hulk smashing his way through chaos, no X-Men fighting for justice, and no Avengers assembling to protect Earth. Now ask yourself, could the world of imagination, hope, and heroes as we know it today even exist? The truth is, it might not have. Because behind the extraordinary empire of Marvel, behind the pages that changed not just comic books but global pop culture forever, stood a man who dared to dream bigger than the world around him allowed. A man who transformed his struggles into stories, his hardships into heroes, and his imagination into immortality. His name? Stan Lee. But the story you're about to hear is not just the tale of a comic book writer. It's the story of a boy who grew up in poverty, of a young man who almost gave up on writing, of a husband whose love saved his destiny, of a creator who was once accused of being nothing more than a fraud, and of a legend who turned into the face of an empire, only to be left heartbroken, exploited, and misunderstood in his final years. This is not a simple biography. This is the saga of Stan Lee, the man who became Marvel's immortal legacy, the humble beginnings. Stan Lee was not born into fame. He was born Stanley Martin Lieber on December 28, 1922, in a small apartment in New York City. His parents, Jack and Celia Lieber, were poor Jewish immigrants from Romania. His father worked as a dress cutter, but the Great Depression crushed his career, and more often than not, young Stanley saw his father unemployed, searching desperately for odd jobs. The Lieber family's apartment was so small that Stan and his younger brother Larry shared a single bedroom. They didn't even have their own beds, just a fold-out couch. At the time, no one could have imagined that from such cramped walls would emerge one of the most imaginative minds of the century. Stan's childhood was not filled with luxury or toys. Instead, his greatest escape was the movies. He devoured films starring Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling hero who inspired Stan's vision of larger-than-life characters. He read voraciously, losing himself in books that transported him away from hunger, away from poverty, away from the real-world struggles of his family. But here's the first little-known truth. Young Stanley didn't grow up dreaming of becoming a comic book writer. No, his dream was to be a great novelist, an author whose name would stand alongside the likes of Mark Twain or Charles Dickens. Comics? At that time, they were considered cheap entertainment, throwaway reading for kids. For Stanley, writing comics was not a dream. It was a job. The accidental door into comics. In 1939, when Stan was just 16, he graduated high school early. With his father unemployed, Stan had to help support his family. He took odd jobs, writing obituaries, delivering sandwiches, even working as an office boy. But fate intervened when he heard about an opening at a company called Timely Publications, which was just beginning to publish comic books. Timely Publications wasn't Marvel yet. It was a small operation run by publisher Martin Goodman. Stan didn't join as a writer. He joined as a lowly assistant. His tasks? Filling inkwells, fetching lunch, and erasing pencil marks for artists. He was, in his own words, a glorified gopher. But destiny works in strange ways. Within 2 years, Stan found himself with an opportunity. In 1941, at just 19 years old, he was asked to write a filler text for Captain America Comics. He created a short 2-page story, signing it not as Stanley Lieber but with a pen name he invented, Stan Lee. Why? Because he thought comics were beneath him. He planned to save his real name for the great American novel he still believed he'd one day write. Ironically, the name Stan Lee would become more famous than he could have ever dreamed. And just like that, a legend had taken his first step. The young editor. Something extraordinary happened soon after. In 1941, the editor of Timely Comics left suddenly. Martin Goodman, desperate, turned to the young, eager Stan. At just 19 years old, Stan Lee became the interim editor of the company. Imagine this, a teenager managing seasoned artists and writers. It was intimidating. The staff didn't take him seriously at first, but Stan had an energy, a vision, and a charisma that couldn't be ignored. He pushed through, balancing his editorial duties with his desire to prove himself as a writer. But then, the world changed. War and the writer. When the United States entered World War II, Stan Lee enlisted in the army in 1942. His military classification? Playwright. He wasn't holding a rifle on the front lines. His weapon was the pen. Stan wrote training manuals, slogans, even scripts for military films. Here's a fascinating detail. Stan served alongside some surprising names. His fellow playwrights in the army included Frank Capra, the legendary director, Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, and Charles Addams, creator of the Addams Family. It was as if destiny was sharpening his storytelling skills in the company of other creative giants. During the war, Stan realized something vital. Words could move people. They could inspire, teach, persuade, and even save lives. This was a lesson he would carry into the world of superheroes. Returning to a changing industry. After the war, Stan returned to timely comics, but the industry had shifted. The superhero craze of the early 1940s was dying. Comic books were moving toward westerns, romance, horror, and crime. Stan adapted, writing whatever the company needed. But inside, he was restless. He wanted to do something more meaningful, more powerful. Yet he felt trapped, churning out disposable stories while still dreaming of becoming a serious novelist. By the 1950s, Stan was burned out. He even considered quitting comics altogether, but then one decision changed everything. The turning point, a wife's advice. In 1947, Stan married Joan Bucock, a British-born model he had fallen in love with at first sight. Their love story itself is legendary. Stan once admitted that Joan was not just his wife, but his anchor, his muse, and his greatest inspiration. In the 1950s, when Stan was on the verge of giving up comics, it was Joan who changed the course of history. Stan came home one day, frustrated, telling Joan he wanted to quit. He was tired of writing meaningless stories. And Joan, with her sharp wisdom, gave him advice that unlocked everything. She said, "Why not write one comic you're proud of? Something you'd actually want to read. Do it your way. What do you have to lose?" Those words lit a fire inside Stan, and soon the world would meet a new kind of hero. The birth of the Fantastic Four. In 1961, publisher Martin Goodman noticed the success of DC Comics' Justice League of America and wanted his own team of superheroes. He asked Stan and artist Jack Kirby to create one. But this time, Stan didn't play by the old rules. Instead of perfect, godlike heroes, he created characters with flaws, insecurities, and real-world problems. Heroes who argued with each other, who doubted themselves, who felt human. Thus was born the Fantastic Four. Mr. Fantastic, the Invisible Woman, the Human Torch, and the Thing weren't just superheroes. They were a family. They bickered, they loved, they struggled, and readers connected with them instantly. The comic was a hit. Stan Lee had just redefined what a superhero could be. Stan wasn't just making heroes. He was building a universe, a Marvel universe, where characters crossed paths, where stories connected, where the world felt alive. And the secret ingredient? Stan's voice. He didn't just write comics, he spoke directly to readers. His editorials, Stan's Soapbox, made fans feel like part of a club. He called them true believers. He ended notes with a single word, Excelsior, a cry of optimism that became his signature. Stan Lee had turned comic books into more than entertainment. He made them a culture, a movement, a mirror of society's struggles and dreams. As Marvel's empire rose, so did tensions. The partnership between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby was legendary, but also bitter. Kirby felt underappreciated, believing Stan took too much credit for co-creations. Many fans and historians agree Kirby's contributions were enormous, perhaps equal to Stan's. Yet Stan, as editor and public face, often received the spotlight. This feud grew over the years, leading to estrangement and controversy. Even today, debates rage. Was Stan Lee the genius, or was he just the showman riding on Kirby and Ditko's art? The truth is messy. Stan was both, a visionary who shaped the stories, and a promoter who gave comics their voice. But those conflicts, those cracks in Marvel's foundation, would haunt him for decades. The rise of Marvel, and Stan the showman. By the mid-1960s, Marvel Comics had gone from a struggling publisher to a cultural phenomenon. Young people across America weren't just reading Marvel, they were living it. College students studied Spider-Man like literature. Protesters carried signs with slogans inspired by the X-Men. The Marvel revolution had exploded, and right at the center of it all was Stan Lee. What made Stan different wasn't just the characters he helped create, it was the way he connected with the audience. Unlike other editors, Stan broke the fourth wall. He spoke directly to fans with warmth, wit, and a wink. He built the Marvel bullpen into a legend, a mythical family of creators that fans felt part of. Stan was not just a writer, he was a showman, a ringmaster. He gave Marvel its beating heart. But fame has a double edge. The shadow of controversy. As Marvel grew, so did questions of credit. Jack Kirby, who co-created Fantastic Four, Hulk, Thor, and X-Men, often felt that Stan downplayed his role. Steve Ditko, the reclusive genius behind Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, grew bitter, feeling he was being overshadowed. By the late 1960s, Ditko walked away from Marvel, never speaking to Stan again. Kirby eventually left as well, taking his talents to DC. Fans and historians have debated for decades. Was Stan Lee unfairly hogging the spotlight, or was he simply the one who could step into it? Stan himself often said he never intended to diminish his collaborators. He insisted that Marvel's success was a team effort. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Stan's charisma made him the face of Marvel, and sometimes that meant others felt left behind. It's a shadow that followed him all his life, breaking beyond the comic book page. While internal conflicts brewed, Stan's vision was expanding. He believed Marvel wasn't just about comics, it was about a universe that could conquer every medium. In the late 1960s, Marvel's characters started appearing in animated TV shows. By the 1970s, Stan had moved to Los Angeles to pursue Hollywood deals. He dreamed of bringing Spider-Man, the X-Men, and the Avengers to the big screen, long before the world thought it possible. But Hollywood wasn't ready. Back then, superheroes were still seen as silly, childish. Movies based on comic characters often turned into campy failures. Stan tried tirelessly, pitching ideas, meeting producers, hoping for a breakthrough. For years, nothing major happened. Spider-Man had low-budget TV shows. The Hulk had a cult favorite series starring Lou Ferrigno, but Marvel never cracked the blockbuster code. Yet Stan never gave up. He believed, he knew, that one day, Marvel heroes would dominate the world. The face of Marvel. While deals fell through, Stan became Marvel's ambassador. He toured colleges, gave lectures, appeared on TV. His energy was contagious. He spoke with passion, humor, and charm. He wasn't just promoting comics, he was promoting imagination. This was when the world started seeing Stan as the father of Marvel. To the public, he was Marvel. Fans adored him. He was witty, approachable, larger than life. But at the same time, his public image deepened the rift with creators like Kirby and Ditko, who felt Stan was claiming too much of the glory. Behind the smile, behind the showmanship, Stan carried the weight of being both loved and accused, celebrated and criticized. The Marvel's struggles. As the 1980s arrived, Marvel was struggling financially. The company changed owners multiple times. Comics faced stiff competition from other forms of entertainment. There were even rumors Marvel might collapse. Stan, meanwhile, became more of a figurehead than a hands-on writer. By then, he had stepped away from scripting comics daily, focusing instead on promoting Marvel. Some fans felt he had abandoned writing. Others felt betrayed that their beloved Uncle Stan seemed distant. But Stan was still dreaming of the big screen. He was convinced that if Marvel's characters reached Hollywood properly, everything would change. And he was right. The Hollywood breakthrough. In the late 1990s, Marvel made licensing deals with film studios. First came Blade, 1998, which surprised audiences by proving Marvel characters could work on screen. Then came X-Men, 2000, and Spider-Man, 2002. The box office erupted. Suddenly, Marvel characters weren't just comic icons, they were global movie stars. And in every one of those movies, fans started noticing something fun, a quick cameo by Stan Lee himself. Maybe he was a man on the street, maybe a delivery guy, maybe just walking by. It was brief, but it was enough to make fans cheer. These cameos became a tradition. To see Stan Lee pop up in a Marvel movie was like spotting the stamp of approval from the master himself. For Stan, those moments were more than just jokes. They were proof of his dream coming true. The Marvel Cinematic Universe. Then came 2008. Iron Man hit theaters. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance brought Tony Stark to life in a way no one expected. It was witty, charming, deeply human, and audiences loved it. That film became the foundation for what would become the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, a project unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. And at the heart of it all were characters born from Stan's imagination. Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Captain America, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange. The MCU was the realization of everything Stan had hoped for back in the 1970s. Though Stan wasn't writing or producing these films, his DNA was in every frame. His vision of flawed, relatable heroes had finally conquered the world. By the 2010s, Marvel movies weren't just popular, they were the most successful film franchise in history. Billions at the box office, fans across continents, heroes who spoke to every culture. And always there was Stan, making his cameo, smiling, waving, reminding us all who started it. Behind the smile, personal loss. As the world celebrated Marvel, Stan's personal life took a tragic turn. In 2017, after nearly 70 years of marriage, Stan lost his beloved Joan. She passed away at the age of 95. For Stan, it was devastating. He often said Joan had been his greatest inspiration. She was the one who encouraged him to write the Fantastic Four. She had been his rock, his partner, his everything. Without her, Stan was vulnerable. And sadly, in his final years, he faced heartbreak that no legend should ever endure. Exploitation and legal battles. After Joan's death, reports surfaced that Stan was being manipulated and exploited. Lawsuits were filed. Caregivers, business associates, even some family members were accused of taking advantage of his wealth and frailty. Stan was in his 90s, still making public appearances, but often looking exhausted. Rumors swirled that he was isolated, pressured, even financially exploited. Fans were horrified. The man who had given the world so much joy was now surrounded by chaos and controversy. Yet through it all, Stan kept smiling for his fans. He kept attending conventions, signing autographs, appearing in films, because he loved the people who loved him. The final cameos. As the MCU grew, Stan's cameos became more emotional. Each appearance felt like a nod, a wink, a blessing from the man who started it all. In Avengers Infinity War 2018, he appeared as a school bus driver, joking with teenagers about seeing aliens. In Captain Marvel 2019, released after his death, he was seen reading a script for Mallrats, a nod to his real-life cameo in that film. But perhaps the most touching was his cameo in Avengers Endgame 2019, filmed before his passing. Seeing him one last time, fans around the world cheered, cried, and whispered, "Thank you, Stan." November 12th, 2018. On that day, the world stopped. Stan Lee passed away at the age of 95. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything the comic industry had ever seen. Fans left flowers outside Marvel offices. Artists around the world drew tributes. Celebrities, from Robert Downey Jr. to Chris Evans to Hugh Jackman, thanked him publicly for shaping their careers and their lives. For millions, it felt like losing a friend. For some, it felt like losing a grandfather. For all, it was losing a hero. The immortal legacy. But here's the truth. Stan Lee never really left us. Every time Spider-Man swings across the screen, every time the Avengers assemble, every time a child picks up a comic book and discovers a world where heroes struggle just like they do, Stan Lee lives again. He once said, "100 years from now, if somebody comes across one of my stories and it brings them some enjoyment, that will be my immortality." And he was right. Stan Lee's immortality is etched in every panel, every frame, every cheer in a movie theater. His heroes are our heroes. His stories are our stories. His imagination is eternal. If you're enjoying this journey into the life of Stan Lee, don't forget to subscribe to Legacy Biographies, hit the like button, and share this video with others who love powerful life stories. Also, drop a comment. Tell us one fact you know about Stan Lee that we didn't cover, or simply share how you felt about this video in just 1 or 2 lines. The untold stories. Stan's life is often told like a fairy tale, but behind the glory there are stories that rarely get told, hidden struggles, unusual decisions and controversies that paint a fuller picture of the man behind the myth. Did you know Stan once faced accusations of being a sellout when Marvel characters were licensed for merchandise? Did you know he nearly lost his position at Marvel multiple times during ownership changes? Did you know he once tried to launch an adult comic line in the 1970s that failed spectacularly? These lesser-known stories remind us that Stan's journey wasn't smooth. It was filled with risks, mistakes, and reinventions. And yet, through it all, he never stopped believing in the power of imagination. The other side of the legend. To the world, Stan Lee was the smiling grandfather of Marvel, the man with the booming voice, the endless optimism, the signature cry of "Excelsior." But behind the smile was a man who endured loneliness, heartbreak, and betrayal. One of the most untold truths about Stan is that for much of his career he lived under constant stress. Comics were not respected in his early years. They were considered trash. Parents often tried to ban them, teachers warned against them, politicians investigated them. In the 1950s, the infamous Comics Code Authority was established, restricting what writers could publish. Violence, horror, even themes of social commentary were censored. Stan hated it. He wanted to tell stories that reflected the real world. So he found clever ways around the rules. Instead of directly addressing racism, he created the X-Men, a metaphor for prejudice. Instead of talking about teenage anxiety in essays, he gave those struggles to Spider-Man. He disguised real pain in fantasy. That was his genius. But it also meant he carried burdens in silence. Stan didn't just make superheroes, he used superheroes to wrestle with the world's flaws. The failed projects nobody talks about. Here's something rarely discussed. Not everything Stan touched turned to gold. In the 1970s, he launched a line of comics for adults called Stan Lee Presents the Mighty Marvel magazine. It failed. He also tried pushing Marvel into experimental media, like live-action TV pilots that flopped miserably. One such project was a 1978 Doctor Strange TV movie that critics dismissed as laughable. Even in Hollywood, Stan faced humiliations. For decades, producers rejected his pitches. Some told him Marvel characters were too silly for real cinema. Imagine that. Today, those same characters dominate box offices, but back then, Stan was dismissed as a dreamer. These failures wounded him, but Stan never let them stop him. He often said, "If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough." The lawsuits and broken trust. In the early 2000s, after Marvel had begun to rise again, Stan faced lawsuits against Marvel itself. He believed he was owed profits from movies and merchandise based on his characters. For years, legal battles dragged on, painting an uncomfortable picture. The man who gave Marvel its identity was fighting for his share of the empire. He eventually reached a settlement, but the damage was done. Stan Lee, the man who had given the world so much, was constantly forced to prove his worth, even to his own company. Worse still, his final years were marred by chaos. After Joan's death, those around him, assistants, lawyers, even relatives, were accused of exploiting him. Court documents described elder abuse, stolen money, and manipulation. For fans, it was painful to watch. The man who had given us heroes seemed to be without protection in his final chapter. Stan Lee's true superpower. And yet, despite all the pain, all the lawsuits, all the betrayals, Stan's spirit never broke. When he appeared at conventions, he still greeted fans with warmth. When he filmed cameos, he still delivered with joy. His superpower wasn't flight or strength. It was his ability to connect with people. Stan Lee believed that every person, no matter how ordinary, had greatness inside them. That's why Spider-Man wasn't a billionaire playboy or a god. He was a nerdy teenager from Queens. That's why the X-Men weren't adored. They were outcasts. Stan didn't just create superheroes. He gave us ourselves in costume. That was his true magic. The philosophical Stan. Few people know this, but Stan was deeply philosophical. He often reflected on mortality, legacy, and human purpose. Once he said, To me, writing is fun. It doesn't matter what you're writing, as long as you can tell a story. Another time, when asked about death, he answered with humility, "I used to think what I did was not very important. People are building bridges, going into medical careers, and here I was writing stories about fictional people who could do extraordinary things. But I suppose if entertainment is what keeps people going, then maybe it's not so unimportant after all." It's in those words we see the real Stan, aware of his place yet humble enough to wonder if he had truly mattered. The irony? He mattered more than he ever knew. The global impact. By the time of his passing, Stan Lee's creations had reached every corner of the globe. Children in India read Spider-Man comics. Fans in Brazil cosplayed as the X-Men. Entire generations in Africa, Europe, Asia, and beyond grew up believing in Marvel heroes. His stories crossed cultures because they weren't just about powers, they were about humanity. A struggling student in New York could see himself in Peter Parker. A community facing prejudice in any part of the world could see themselves in the X-Men. A leader rising for his people could see himself in Black Panther. Stan Lee had tapped into something universal, the desire for hope. The final lesson. So what can we learn from Stan Lee's life? He was not perfect. He faced controversies, criticisms, failures, and heartbreak. He was sometimes accused of stealing credit, sometimes accused of being a sellout, sometimes mocked as a cartoon man in a world that worshipped serious literature. And yet, he endured. He never stopped dreaming. He never stopped writing. He never stopped believing in the power of stories to change lives. That's the lesson. Greatness is not about being flawless. It's about never giving up on the spark that makes you unique. Stan Lee's spark was imagination, and he used it to light the world. That spine-tingling ending that gives you goosebumps. On the day Stan Lee died, millions mourned, but perhaps the most moving tribute came from his own words. He once said, "That person who helps others simply because it should be done, and because it's the right thing to do, is indeed without a doubt a real superhero." Stan Lee wasn't just the man who created superheroes. In many ways, he was one. Not because he had powers, but because he gave them to us. He gave us hope, he gave us courage, he gave us a reason to believe that even the most ordinary among us could be extraordinary. The world will never forget Spider-Man's lesson. With great power comes great responsibility. But what the world should also remember is Stan Lee's unspoken lesson. With great imagination comes immortality. Stan Lee is gone, but his legacy will live as long as stories are told, as long as children dream, as long as humanity believes in heroes. And maybe tonight, somewhere in the vast Marvel universe of our own imaginations, Stan Lee is smiling, waving, and whispering his eternal motto, Excelsior.